Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue with you once again. It's our second week of April. We got more Penn State spring football action coming our way on the practice field this week. Tuesday afternoon into the evening, myself, Mark Brennan, Grace Brennan, and Daniel Gallen all heading back to Penn State's outdoor practice facility for a look at these Nittany Lions. We're a few weeks away from the blue-white game in Beaver Stadium, April 26th. Hope to get a chance to see many of you back here on campus for that event. In the meantime, we'll have a ton of updates coming your way at lions247.com. I've been mentioning this every single episode. I'm going to do it one more time here, and I'll probably do it again the next episode until this deal ends at the conclusion of spring practices. But we have a 50% off for a full year of VIP coverage at lions247.com, or $1 for 1 month. And as we've really been trying to emphasize to you here on the show, and has become apparent over at the site, when spring practices resume, recruiting intensifies. We've got a lot of prospects coming to campus. We've got some recent commitments. We've got some recent commitment reinforcements and all sorts of things happening. So we're going to get into that a little bit more on this episode with recruiting insider Tyler Cavaruso. And before we do that, we're actually going to pick his brain on 5 different roster risers from this 2025 spring practice session. 5 names that we've heard really good things about in terms of what they're doing at their respective positions, maybe making some moves in their careers at different points to put themselves in a situation to play a lot of football in 2025. And so Tyler Cavaruso in each of those cases has covered those players since their high school days when Penn State put out scholarship offers. He has a very intimate knowledge about the conversations that led them to campus and about the development that has taken place since. So that's where we'll begin this episode, and we bring back in Tyler Cavaruso right now. Welcome back, my friend.
It's good to be back, man. Always looking forward to it. It's going to be a good chat today.
You have always done a fantastic job covering recruiting for Penn State fans over at lions247.com, but that's going back to 2022 when you first joined us. However, you didn't always have context on the current roster. Now that you've got a few cycles under your belt with us at Lions247, second, third-year players at Penn State now, you have that context. You understand that history. You know what the staff was thinking when they put out scholarship offers and when it ultimately accepted commitments. So I think it'll be a fun exercise for us to work our way through this. Daniel, Mark, and myself later on as spring practice continues, we'll talk a lot about these things in terms of the depth chart context and the roster and how these are impacting. But I think this is a good chance to spotlight several of these players and their individual development. One of those names that we discussed a bit last week and someone that I wrote about last week over on the website is Javen Williams, former 5-star offensive lineman. He was considered the top prospect out of the state of Pennsylvania and out of Wyomissing High School, the 2023 cycle. He's now a redshirt sophomore, played a bit as a backup guard and tackle last year. A year earlier than that, he preserved his redshirt status while entering 3 games at left tackle. Right now, a lot of concentration on him at the right tackle spot with Nolan Rucci, Anthony Donko currently unavailable. He's getting the bulk of work, playing a lot in that first team role. James Franklin says when those guys do return to work, guard is still very much in that conversation for him. But they say he has a bright future for this program. He's obviously someone that you want to keep tabs on here, even if he doesn't land in the starting lineup for an offensive line that is very deep. So take us back to the origin story here in terms of Javen Williams, not just being a 5-star talent in the eyes of this Penn State staff, but someone that they envision could be under discussion at both guard and tackle, because we've seen that taking place here in 2025.
Well, if you go back to his high school career in terms of potential positional versatility at the next level, he played at Wyomissing, and their ground and pound offense, they run the ball the large majority of the time. So Javen Williams arrived at Penn State with a lot of experience in the run blocking department, a lot of experience with zone blocking schemes, with Wyomissing running that triple option offense. You got to pull a lot. So he was adept at doing that. So when his size as well lends the potential for him to play on the interior, he has that run blocking kind of background built in already. And that's a big plus for him in that regard. I think since he's arrived on campus, since he's gotten to Penn State and has continued to fill out physically, because that was a big thing with him in high school. Early on, there was still a lot of baby fat on the frame for Javen Williams. As time went on, though, by the time he was a senior at Wyomissing, it was a completely different story. That transformation has continued in the right direction since he got to Penn State. And he's continued to develop as a pass blocker too. Because again, like I said, when you're running the ball that much at the high school level, there aren't that many opportunities to, get into your pass sets, perfect your kick step. You can do all the individual training and practice you want, But going to Penn State and doing it against Big Ten defensive linemen every day on a daily basis in practice, it could take you a little bit. And, Williams has developed nicely. He's come along nicely. I think a lot of people saw a 5-star and everything that went along with that. They immediately expect impact. Offensive linemen, they're a different breed. They develop at their own pace. There's a lot more that goes into it than some of the other positions from a developmental standpoint. Williams, I think, has started to check a lot of boxes on the development front. I think he has trended in the right direction nicely. He's where Penn State wants him to be at this point. So him being in this conversation, regardless of position, whether it be guard or tackle, him being this heavily factored in the conversation at this juncture in his career, it doesn't come as a surprise to me. I think he's ready to take that next step and be a legitimate contributor.
When you work your way through this offensive line, look, Vega Ioane is a redshirt junior, but he's got preseason All-American accolades. He could have a decision to make at the end of the year. We know at the other tackle spot on the left side, Drew Shelton is a senior. At the right side, you've got Anthony Donko in the same class as Javen Williams. They're both redshirt sophomores. Donko obviously has a lot more experience under his belt at tackle with 10 starts from last season. But Nolan Rucci, who's also vying for that job still, is a fifth-year senior. So you've got some tackles that, regardless of how it pans out this year, Shelton and Rucci are moving forward with their career. We already talked about guard being in play for Javen Williams, but when you look beyond the starting lineup at this team and kind of where guys are in their career trajectory, few players seem to have more importance in terms of their potential value for this team as a backup piece maybe this year. But when you start talking about rolling it forward and what they might mean in 2026, he's toward the top of that list of the offensive line room. And Tyler, another former 5-star that we have a lot of focus on this spring and will continue to have focus on going into preseason camp come August is Luke Reynolds, considered the top tight end recruit in the country for the 2024 class, came to campus, and due to some circumstances around him, a preseason injury for Khalil Dinkins, who ended up getting back to action, a game 2 injury, a week 2 injury for Andrew Rapplier, which kept him sidelined the rest of the way. Luke Reynolds not only saw action, but he saw consistent action. Burned redshirt status, was the 3rd tight end for this team in the playoffs behind Dinkins, and of course, All-American Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren and his 104 catches from last season are moving on to the NFL. Khalil Dinkins is a 5th-year senior. Andrew Rapplier is a redshirt sophomore trying to work his way back. And by the way, you've got Andrew Olish, the latest top tight end recruit to come to campus as one of 3 freshmen mix. But let's be real. In terms of the pizzazz of a prospect profile, it's hard to look away from Luke Reynolds and what he may be able to do in igniting some of this pass attack come autumn.
Yeah, I think it's been hard to ignore that profile since the day he arrived on campus as a true freshman, early enrollee. The biggest difference here now for Luke Reynolds is it's a second spring practice versus the first spring practice. That first spring practice, he was still at a point in his career where he had just moved out to play tight end full-time at Cheshire as a senior. So he only had really, 5, 6, 7 months of full-time tight end experience under his belt. It's not easy to go to the next level. As athletically gifted and as physically gifted as Luke Reynolds is and has been since we saw him on the camp circuit as an upperclassman, there's a little bit of an adjustment. And I think he handled it about as well as he possibly could have to make the waves that he did as a true freshman. Now it's year 2. So now he's geared up and ready to go because he knows exactly what spring ball entails, and he knows what he has to do as a tight end to play for Ty Howell, to play for Janet Franklin, to play for Andy Cole-Mickey. He knows exactly what it takes to get onto the field, exactly what it takes to thrive in Penn State system. And he sees an opportunity ahead of him. The big thing with Luke Reynolds is, and you saw this, we talked about it when we watched him together during Elite 11. He has a mentality that he's an ultra-competitive kid. His head is in the right place when it comes to competing. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to see the field in this Penn State tight end room, you got to be ready to come to play on a daily basis. And the fact of the matter is, you're going to be a dog on a daily basis because you've got a ton of guys in that room who can contribute and a ton of guys who are up and coming. Luke Reynolds, he's had that mindset since before he was a collegiate athlete. He's had it. It's in him. So I think that is factored pretty largely into where his development trending in the right direction as well. He's got the physical side taken care of for sure. He has the mental side taken care of as well.
Every blue chip pass target you talk to in high school is going to tell you they're a competitor, they're ready to get to campus and compete. But what happens when on a college field, they got to chip a 270-pound defensive end, and then they got to work their way past a Division I linebacker and keep their wits about them while they know a safety could be bearing down from the second level while they go up top to catch a pass. it was limited sample size, but I just saw no fear from Luke Reynolds in doing any of those things over the course of his freshman year process. And oh, by the way, when Penn State was at its most dire straits in terms of the college football playoff berth being on the line, he got the ball in the fourth quarter of a late fake punt at Minnesota and ran more than 30 yards with it. And he has that history. It's going to get overplayed, especially as people get to know about Luke Reynolds, that he shares that history of being a high school quarterback like Tyler Warren. Of course, the big difference that we've monitored here is that he didn't wait to get to campus to make that really transition in earnest. This is a guy who was all in on the tight end position late in his high school career. We saw it on the camp circuit. He came to campus with a bit more polish. And there's a reason that Tyler Warren at Pro Day, 10 days ago, was telling us that this is as far advanced of a freshman tight end that he witnessed during his time on campus. And he says he has a chance to be good as anybody at this position, and that's coming from someone who has been as good as anybody at this position for tight end for Tyler Warren. So it'd be fun to follow Luke Reynolds, a guy that we got to know a little bit last year, but still waiting to learn more about from that 2024 class is receiver Tyseer Denmark. And look, when you look outside of Luke Reynolds about impactful components of this offensive attack who are redshirt freshmen or sophomores, I think Tyseer Denmark is the next name that you're going to go to. He caught a touchdown on the very last play of the regular season last year. Turned out to be Bo Perbula farewell moment, essentially, in Beaver Stadium. But we didn't see a lot of Tyseer Denmark. Fewer than 60 offensive snaps as a freshman. I know there were some frustrations with that among fans because you saw the veteran receivers for much of the season not necessarily producing at a consistent level, continuing to get that run. Tyseer Denmark ultimately could not elbow any of them away from the rotational plans. And so we're left to see what it looks like when he has a lot more workload. Sounds like everything we've heard from inside team facilities, what we've kind of witnessed on the practice field, he is in for a spike in game snaps come late August into September. And Tyler, what do you remember most about Penn State's relationship with Denmark, remembering that he was committed to Oregon for a time period? And what have you learned about his progress since he got to campus last year? Again, some folks felt like maybe he could be that impact true freshman that this program has not had of late. Maybe it comes in year two.
Yeah, I think year two is the time for Tyseer Denmark to get going because his strengths as a high school prospect translate quite well to the collegiate level in terms of, me and you were pretty candid about it throughout his recruitment that we thought he was a 4-star level guy because he dropped off 4-star. He had 4 stars on our end for a little bit, dropped down a little. The testing numbers weren't really available. They weren't as elite as some of the other guys. But at the end of the day, when it comes to producing at a high clip, testing numbers go out the window once you step on the field, put the pads on. Obviously, they play a huge part because athletically you got to be up to snuff. But Tyseer Denmark is the ultimate technician as a route runner. He has been, his footwork, everything that goes into being a high-level route runner. Denmark has had that as part of his profile as a player since he was in high school. It was a big reason why Penn State never quit after he committed to Oregon. They easily could have just packed it up and just say, hey, look, he's going out there. We've got other high-quality guys on the board. Let's turn our focus there. But the staff didn't do that. They stayed on Denmark. In welcoming him into the class was viewed as a pretty big win because of some of the feedback that we've been receiving. He only continues to get better as a route runner. His hands are what they need to be. Athletically, the arrow continues to point up there. So there's opportunity in year two, no doubt about it. You brought in the 2 transfers in Hudson and Ross, so you got some veterans in the room. But beyond that, there's opportunity to claim playing time. The door is open. James Franklin and Marcus Higgins are going to run the best group of wideouts out there. And if Tyseer Denmark goes through spring ball and continues at the clip that, we've been hearing that he's been producing, and that carries over into fall camp, and he continues to shine in that way, there's no reason why he can't be a prominent part of this passing attack in 2025. He has the route running ability, has the hands, athleticism, again, pointing in the right direction, arrow up. That's kind of all you could really want from a young player at this point in his development. I think Denmark's doing a lot of the right things behind the scenes and showing on the practice field.
And I think he's exhibiting that aggression that we've heard not so subtly from Marcus Higgins last week say needs to be a part of this receiver room identity. He threw a few curse words in there. He wants guys who don't give a bleep. That when
That's
the
that
ball
Philly and Tyseer Denmark too, right there. That's that Philly background.
And we saw that from Tyseer Denmark when we got some looks at him in 7-on-7 and camp action. We've seen it a bit in the practice field. I can tell you, we saw him get some high contact moments last time we got a look on the practice field with the ball, without the ball as a blocker. I liked what I saw from him. And if I'm forecasting it out based on the conversations that we've had with people in the building, based on what we've heard and witnessed with our own eyes, I'm forecasting him as one of the 4 primary receivers. And I know James Franklin every year says they want 6. They want a rotation of 6 receivers. Been harder to come by most years than not. Last year was clearly a 4-man plan with Julian Fleming and Liam Clifford joining Harrison Wallace and Amari Evans. So 3 of those guys are gone. I think Liam Clifford's still in that conversation. He's a guy that they really count on in some important ways. But I think Devontae Ross, Kyron Hudson, the 2 transfers, and then the redshirt freshman, Tyseer Denmark. If I was to pencil in my 4 right now and what I think the forecast will be for that first game against Nevada, that would be my 4. A lot of room for guys like Kobe Howard, Peter Gonzalez, Caden Saunders to make some kind of moves here in the weeks and months ahead. But you really have to like where Tyseer Denmark is. And a good reminder from Tyler there about where he was as a recruit making this jump. And over on defense, 2 names I want to get to with you. Let's start on the defensive front. I spoke with Venga Ioane after practice last Tuesday, and this is a guy who many view as the top professional prospect on Penn State's current offensive line. He was asked who is stepping up at defensive tackle because they have a lot of familiar names that are no longer part of the equation at that position for Penn State. Devon J. Thomas, Alonzo Ford is sidelined right now. Keziah Izzard is gone. Akeem Beeman is gone. He quickly said Ty Blanding and then Xavier Gilliam. Ty Blanding's a redshirt sophomore. We've heard some nice buzz on him, but the buzz has been on the redshirt freshman, Xavier Gilliam, really going back to when he showed up to campus last year, but particularly here in year 2, whether it was what he accomplished in the weight room during their winter workouts, what he has done on the spring practice field right now. Didn't get a lot of looks in game action last year because they were really in a good spot at the top of that depth chart. Even after losing a couple guys late in the season, they were trusting their veterans in those roles. But that they're gone. Xavier Gilliam's going to play a bunch of ball. And I want you to refresh us on why he was a coveted recruit and where he is now based on what you've gathered as a redshirt freshman.
Yeah, so first things first for me with Gilliam, he's far from a finished product, but I think you're starting to see a lot of the puzzle pieces fall into place here pretty early for him. A lot of the raw traits that Penn State saw in him as a high school prospect, they're developing at a high rate and they're being fine-tuned at a high rate. And you talk about the door being open at wide receiver. The door is definitely open for a young guy like Gilliam to step up and assume a big role in 2025. He's always had the athleticism, right? He's got that basketball background. Early in his prep career, he thought he was going to be a basketball player for a little bit, but he was always a really good football player too. A really good defensive end. But as Mother Nature had its way, he continued to put on size, start to project a little bit more as an interior guy at the next level. Of course, that's where he is at Penn State, and really he has thrived in the role. I'll always say this with Gilliam whenever he comes up in our conversation. I really think that senior year move to Quince Orchard to play alongside Jalen Harvey was big for him. I think it allowed him to, one, escape a lot of the double teams he was seeing at his previous school. It allowed him a little bit more freedom to work and grow as a defensive lineman, develop that bag a little bit. Because when you're a high school kid facing double teams like Gilliam was at his previous stop, you're kind of just relying on your raw strength, athleticism, your natural given ability to kind of break out of those double teams. You know, you're not going to be pulling out any Dwight Freeney type spin moves to get out of those. You know, you're just not at that point in your development yet. So going over to Quince Orchard and playing with a guy like Jalen Harvey, whether Jalen Harvey wound up at Penn State or not, high-level high school defensive lineman. Those two on the same D-line, it was a dangerous duo because offensive lines, they have to worry about both of them. So both these guys, they were able to not only impact the game at a high level, but really develop certain parts of their game. So I think all of that leading up to Gilliam's arrival at Penn State, and he killed it as a true freshman behind the scenes. He really did. He did everything right in the weight room, on the practice field. People in Lash rave about him all the time. So he's one of those guys who's always coming up in conversation. So I think everything leading up to his arrival at Penn State, it's a direct correlation to where he is now. I think he's done almost everything you could possibly do right in your development to get to this point.
He's been a guy that emerged as a prospect, probably more as this is a basketball player who's figuring out football as a sophomore, as a junior, goes to Quince Orchard. He's 280 pounds by the end of his high school career. He's clearly a projectable talent on the defensive line for the Penn State staff. And the lines that were drawn when we spoke with the Nittany Lions staff when they were on the verge of signing him a couple of cycles ago was they really kind of leaned on their evaluation of Zane Durant, who was someone who, kind of stacked up some weight during his process, always ended up in the backfield at the high school level. They feel really good about seeing him as somebody who maybe was more of a perimeter suited player at the prep level, moving him inside. It's been a beautiful process so far, and I think we're really starting to see that come to fruition for Deion Barnes. It's not going to be a two-man show by any means at defensive tackle this year. Zane Durant is the headliner. Many believe he could be the top defensive tackle in the Big Ten this year, but you're going to continue to see at least 4-5 guys involved. Seems like Gilliam's going to be a prominent one of those names. And over at linebacker, Tyler, we know two sure things, I guess you could call them, because Dom DeLuca's played a ton of football. He's a redshirt senior. Tony Rojas has a year of starting experience under his belt. He's a junior, not available right now for early spring practices is Rojas, but you feel pretty good about those two. Beyond them, as we've discussed during the podcast, there's a lot of conversations to have about what this linebacker unit will look like during the 2025 season. And Tamir Robinson is someone that we've consistently heard good things about this spring. We heard really strong feedback about where he was mentally from a confidence standpoint coming out of this winter, going into spring ball. But I'll tell you what, he was a guy that last August, nearing kickoff, we really felt like was going to take a step on defense. He was banged up in game one, really was never able to emerge as a presence defensively beyond a backup piece who played on special teams. I think that narrative is about to change in a big way for him as a redshirt sophomore. And he is obviously someone who, despite injury issues at the high school level in Pittsburgh, this staff loved him. They prioritized him, and they have ultimately brought him to campus. And I wonder if that investment in that patience is about to pay off in a significant way.
Yeah, I think the patience goes back to really just seeing the raw traits behind Robinson, because you mentioned that he battled those injuries in high school. It made it a little bit more difficult of an evaluation than it definitely would have been had he been on the field regularly, because Tamir Robinson, physically, he's always been a beast. He's definitely had an athletic edge over a lot of high school competition that he saw. And, sometimes guys like that, they get to the next level, it evens out. You're at a, evil level with all these athletes on the field, and some guys rise to the occasion, some don't. Tamir Robinson has definitely risen to the occasion. Another thing you have to keep in mind with him, too, is, a lot of his high school experience came as an edge rusher, coming off the edge. And there was always the thought that he has the athletic ability and traits to develop into the linebacker we're seeing him become now. So Penn State exhibited a lot of patience in that recruitment, because not just from the development standpoint either. That was a battle, man. There was a point where it looked like Tamir Robinson was heading to Miami. And Penn State came in late. Manny Diaz was actually the one that really helped get that one across the line when he was still in place as Penn State's defensive coordinator. He did a really good job of selling Robinson on his fit, saying, hey, look, you come here and play linebacker in this kind of a system. What you do well as an athlete, it's going to translate. And you're not just going to be able to, be a serviceable player at this level. You're going to be a really good player at this level with your athleticism, what you do well as a player. So Manny Diaz did a really good job getting this one across the line for the Nittany Lions. And the current staff has just picked up and run with Tamir Robinson in terms of what he is as an athlete. So it's like a common theme today. We're talking about the door being open for these younger guys to step into bigger roles. It's open at wideout. It's open on the D-line. It's open at linebacker. I could see all three of the guys that we just discussed really rising to that occasion, getting it done and being prominent parts of this team in 25.
Yeah, and Tamir Robinson is somebody that I think Tom Allen described as having long levers, and he moved well with those levers. And every coach has kind of had a different description of him. We haven't necessarily heard from Jim Knowles regarding Tamir Robinson yet, but I can tell you, checking in with some staff last week, again, the thing that was kind of reinforced to me a little bit was the confidence, the way he's carrying himself. And remember, that doesn't go on. That isn't just about how he's carrying himself personally. If you want this guy to maybe step up and be your next Mike linebacker, he's going to be carrying a lot of weight for a lot of people on that field defensively. Remember, Kobe King had that dot in his helmet. He was the one disseminating the information from the coaching staff in live time while you're trying to get ready to take on an offensive snap. So a lot that goes into that role. And Tamir Robinson and those 4 other players we just talked about as potential risers on this roster will remain in the spotlight for us over at Lions247.com. We'll continue to get looks at this team. Again, back on the field Tuesday. We'll have a full practice notebook, photo galleries, highlights, and all that. But just like we'll be back on the practice field Tuesday with those Nittany Lions, we'll get more recruits on the practice field because time and time again, the Nittany Lions are capitalizing on their opportunity to get high school players and their families on the sideline, get a chance to see what a Nittany Lions practice looks like, field some questions, hopefully send a young man home with some answers that make him feel better about your program. And Tyler, we've been bouncing all over the place in terms of the recruiting conversation this month. It's going to be obviously finishing off with a major event for the Blue-White weekend. We don't know how many people are going to be able to fit in Beaver Stadium generally, but we know they'll do their best to make sure a big chunk of them are recruiting priorities. Let's go and begin with a familiar name because he's got an older brother on the current Nittany Lions roster. Owen Wafel made the move after a freshman year with Michigan, hit the transfer portal. He's now a redshirt freshman defensive tackle with the Nittany Lions. His younger brother, Luke, is one of the premier edge rusher prospects in the region on the defensive line and Princeton High School, over in Princeton at the Hun School, which is where Caden Wallace came out of 6 years ago, ended up being a 3-year starter for Penn State at offensive tackle. So Wafel around this team has a connection in the locker room now. Where are the Nittany Lions with him?
Well, I'll just use his words directly. There's no need for me to speculate on this one. Right now, Penn State is the top option for Luke Wafel. That is what he told me on Sunday morning after we got the chance to catch up, chat about his visit. And his main takeaway was really he thinks this team can win a national title in 25. He thinks the talent is in place. He thinks the coaches are in place. And obviously he won't get the chance to be part of Penn State's 25 roster and the other 25 roster in the nation. But he sees the potential for Penn State to be a big-time player in the national title picture this upcoming season. And he could see himself being part of the solution beyond this season. He sees a fit in that defensive line, playing for Jim Knowles, playing for Deion Barnes. And it also helps significantly that his older brother, Owen, as you mentioned, he's been on campus for a little bit now, and there's been positive feedback there, not just on the player, but Owen's feedback on the way things go at Penn State, on the way Deion Barnes truly coaches up his defensive linemen, on the way Jim Knowles is implementing this system and, kind of lining things up for all three units to succeed, making sure the D-line succeeds, making sure the linebacker succeeds, making sure the secondary succeeds. All of that has obviously made its way back to Luke Wafel at home. So he wanted to get up on Saturday and see it all for himself. Wanted to get another up-close look at how Barnes coaches, wanted to get an up-close look at the way that Knowles' defense is being, installed. And I think pretty much every box was checked for Wafel on that visit. So right now, Penn State's the leader, and I would expect him back for Blue-White. It sounds like that's going to be the plan. I don't believe that's necessarily 100% set in stone, but based on what I've been told, that is indeed the plan, which doesn't surprise me. Again, it's another chance to get him to see his brother in action. And there's been a dialogue about those two teaming up the next level. It's not the end-all, be-all in this recruitment. And sometimes you talk about recruitments where brothers are involved, and some of them, they just, the desire to go play again at the next level, play together again at the next level. It's not as burning as some would think, but I think it's very much a factor in this process. That's been an ongoing thing. And again, that's another thing Luke has been candid about with me. He said, it would be awesome to team up with my brother at the next level. He's going to have the chance to do that at Penn State. And now that the Nittany Lions are on the record as his leader coming out of this visit, I think that speaks volumes about the job they've done recruiting him.
And it's not like Owen is working his way toward the exit door. He's a redshirt freshman. There's a chance that you're going to have, you will have both of these guys next year in college level with freshman and sophomore eligibility. If that's in the same defensive line room, you got a chance to play some significant college football together during your careers. Wafel, number 109 overall in our top 24/7 for the 26 class. 6'5", 240 plus pounds, number 12 edge rusher nationally, number 1 player in the state of New Jersey. Let's stay in the Garden State with you, Tyler, and go over to DePaul Catholic High School. Marlon Bright is a long, relatively light offensive tackle prospect over there at DePaul. Number 9 player in the state of New Jersey, number 40 offensive tackle recruit in our assessment at 24/7 Sports. He's over 30 scholarship offers. He's a high academic kid too. The offer sheet reflects that. And he's somebody that you've been bringing up quite consistently, it feels like, in recent months, and saying he may not have that pedigree of a rating right now as a high 3-star recruit, but he is very high on Phil Trautwein's target board.
Very, very high on that board. And I think there's a lot of optimism inside of Lash about the way this one can go for Penn State. There's been a sentiment that Bright's been around a bunch. He's a really good fit on and off the field at Penn State. He's close with Mike Troutman from their days together at DePaul. And Troutman has had nothing but good things to say about what Phil Troutman has been doing with that offensive line room. And there's just this overall comfort that Marlon Bright has with Troutman and the rest of the Penn State staff that it's looking like the Nittany Lions are going to be difficult to beat when it's all said and done. Bright has that early summer official visit lined up with Penn State, May 30th through June 1st. That's when he's going to be in town. That's going to be the same weekend as Penn State, the bulk of their 26 commits. That's when those guys are going to be in town as well. I think that's going to be big for Bright because he's going to be able to catch up with some of the guys he can potentially suit up with at the next level. Those guys, they don't shy away from peer recruiting. So they'll be all over a guy like Marlon Bright, when he's on campus. So I like where Penn State's at in this one right now. I think that, again, a lot of the right buttons have been pushed. And I don't want to say it's more when, not if, because nothing is ever done in recruiting. But there's a really strong feeling that Penn State could win this battle in the end.
Someone who keeps cutting back to campus out of IMG Academy down in Florida, Jake Krull, a number 60 overall talent, number 7 edge rusher, had a very strong season last year for IMG Academy with their national level schedule. A bunch of offers, I believe 50-plus scholarship offers to his credit right now. Recently was one of the premier performers at an Under Armour regional camp down in Miami. So he continues to look the part, and he continues to show love to the Penn State staff and that opportunity. So where are we with Penn State with Jake Krull? Because he's a guy who has a vast collection of options. He's at a program that's going to be a revolving door of Division I coaches visiting there. And are the Nittany Lions a long-term player here?
I think they have the chance to be. I think the fact that he wanted to make it back for this spring practice visit, as he previously said, because, some guys, they visit during the spring or during the winter. And they have a really good experience, and they want to get back in the spring. But then the reality of their recruitment kind of sets back in, and, they focus or zone in more on the programs that they have had higher on their list from an extended period of time. Then you have other guys like Jay Krull who want to get out and check out and see more of the schools that made a big impression on him during the winter. So I think Penn State does have the potential to fall into that category. I think even if they do fall into that category, there's still going to be a hill to climb, because there's a ton of competition here. I mean, he's one of the best edge rushers in the nation. But I think it's going to be, although it would be a tough battle, I think Penn State would have a chance. The key would be getting an official visit locked in, right? If he comes out of this Tuesday spring practice visit with an official visit set, that'd be a huge win for Penn State. And even if he sets one shortly after the visit concludes, that would be a huge win for Penn State, because I think Jake Krull's a guy who you want to get him back for a 3-day official visit, because it affords you more time to have the conversations that need to be had about fit, about what it's like to live in State College, about all the things that go into an official visit, and why Penn State does a good job on official visits, really being able to sell that vision. So I'd say yes, but we'll see how Tuesday goes.
Yeah. Right now, by the way, number 10 class nationally for Penn State in 2026 cycle, 9 commitments on board. Krull seemed to really enjoy himself making the trip up in February. He'll get another look. We'll see if that results in yet another trip, which would be likely the official visit variety. As you said, a top 100 edge rusher. I want to cast your attention toward a couple of linebackers on Penn State's 2026 board. Of course, they are now officially working with Dan Connor as their linebackers coach. He was essentially working in that capacity last year. Now he's definitely doing it. Matthew Cano is a player that you brought up last episode, and looking ahead to last weekend out of Patriot High School in Nokesville, Virginia. And then Nick Abrams from a very familiar pipeline for Penn State fans, the McDonough School down in Maryland. It's been very good to them. He is a top 24/7 talent at the linebacker spot from that program. So when it comes to both Cano and Abrams, where is Penn State right now, and where are they generally in sorting their way through a 2026 linebacker board?
Well, Cano, I would say Penn State's probably still on top there. The feedback there has still been pretty, overwhelmingly positive. Abrams, it's a race. Penn State's done really well there for a long time. And, he even told me the other day that they're right in that mix. They've got an equal chance of the rest of the schools that are pushing to land them. So They're both, if both want to hop on board today, both would have a spot from what I've gathered. So in terms of placement on the board, they're both priority guys. Penn State fared well with both over the weekend. It was important for those two. It came up with both of them. They wanted to see more of Dan Connor doing the linebacker drills because they really hadn't gotten that chance. And it was their first time seeing a Penn State spring practice. Now, I think the difference between Canoe and Abrams in terms of how this visit played out was Canoe already knew Jim Knowles a little bit more than Abrams, and that Abrams still building that relationship with Knowles. Canoe it's a little bit further along, and I think that really helped Penn State continue to stand out with Canoe because he's already got a good idea of what Penn State has to offer. He loves Dan Connor. The one question he had, the glaring question was, all right, how am I going to fit in the system? Where am I at in the scheme? And you saw that on Saturday.
Tyler, the last name we wanted to finish off here with on recruiting, it's a name that you brought to the table for us in a 2027 prospect. So a high school sophomore, a 6'4", 220-pound high school sophomore out of Millbrook High School in Raleigh, North Carolina, Rashad Streets. He's looking like one of those names we should get used to in that 2027 cycle, considering where his offer sheet is, considering how much Penn State seems to appreciate his profile early on in the process. Why did you want to bring him up in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, well, first things first, for me, I wanted to get to him. Penn State made a big move here. They're definitely, I know it's early. He's a 27, of course, but they're an early top contender. They're right there in that recruitment. And it was his first visit. And really for him, the big thing was getting more around the staff because he's spent plenty of time on the phone with Deion Barnes. He wanted some valuable FaceTime in person. Now, not just to get a look at the system, but get a feel for the people. You know, I think Penn State, Streets gave him some pretty high marks coming out of that. So he's very open right now in his process. He's open to pretty much everything because he hasn't even kicked off his junior season yet. But when it comes to early top group of schools, Penn State is in it after this visit. And Penn State is continuing to push really, really hard for Streets. They really like his game. They think he could be an elite edge rusher at the next level. So with 27s, it's still early from an evaluation standpoint and formulating the board. But there are a few guys who stand out from time to time as ones who have staying power in terms of being priority prospects in a future class. Rashad Streets, he's one of those guys.
Just like we're gearing up for another week back on the practice field, we've got 3 Nittany Lions practice sessions coming up this week, including the next one, which we'll be out at on Tuesday. Tyler Calvaruso is going to have the goods and the details on what's happening behind the scenes of those practices from a recruiting standpoint. Who's showing up to campus? What are they hearing? What are they witnessing? And what are they talking about when they leave campus? You're going to get all that and a lot more over at Lions247.com. 50% off full VIP access for an entire year ahead, or $1 for 1 month right now. A couple different deals we have going on only during the spring practice. There's a couple weeks left on that. Tyler, appreciate the perspective as always. We'll end it there. I'm sure we'll have a lot more conversation to pick up next time. In the meantime, hope people go over, check out all the great work you're doing for us over at Lions247.com.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Already looking forward to the next time. I can tell you that.
All right. It won't be long till we get Tyler back here on the podcast. Certainly, you can check out our work in the meantime over at Lions247.com. As I said, we'll have a ton over on the site. Tuesday afternoon into the evening, full photo gallery, likely 2 practice notebooks. We'll have a bunch of feedback on what we saw, maybe who we didn't see out there at practice as well. For now, stepping aside until we get to you with a second episode of the podcast this week, I'm Tyler Donahue, and this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.